Okay, so Daniel chapter 7 is where we'll start reading after we talk about some intro stuff. So this is the last time that you'll see this chart up here, right? So we've been going through chapters 2 through 7. Now, I'll ask for a moment, why isn't chapter 1 up there? Like, we've been showing this over and over and over again. Why are we not including chapter 1? It's part of the book. It's important. There's one key factor that makes it stands out from chapters 2 through 7. And one final hint, something that we'll jump back into in chapters 8 through 12. I know, so long ago. You read through your English Bible, you're not going to tell the difference. But if we're reading in the original language, what's chapter 1 written in? Hebrew, okay, and then that means we're like, okay, well, I know Hebrew was primarily what the Old Testament was written in, but what about chapters 2 through 7? Greek would be a good guess. We said see that more in the New Testament, but Aramaic is what it's written in, right? Which would have been that common language, especially during captivity and as they've come out of captivity. And so that's why we're grouping these together, but we've said they also form a nice, tight kind of picture, a mirror image of each other, where we had starting off with that vision of 4 kingdoms in chapter 2. We moved into the martyr story with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then we finished off that first half with the downfall of Nebuchadnezzar, but also him humbling himself with his pride. And then we saw the same thing in chapter 5 with Belshazzar, right? His son, for all intents and purposes, experiences that, but has a very different outcome. We saw another martyr story with Daniel in the lion's den. And then last but not least, the chapter we're on right now, what are we to expect to hear all about? Yeah, so another vision, but specifically about those 4 kingdoms. So we would be amiss to not draw that parallel between chapters 2 and chapter 7. And so that being the case, because there's so much to talk about in chapter 7, we'll probably speed through a good portion of the beginning of chapter 7 because we kind of already had that back in chapter 2. Remind me really quickly what happened in chapter 2, just to have that on our minds as we're building that picture.
It's the golden image, or the image that was seen by Daniel, which represented the 4 kingdoms coming.
Okay, so we have this image, statue, if you want to call it that, with different parts made out of different metals, each representing different kingdoms, is interpreted by Daniel for Nebuchadnezzar. And of course, he sees the downfall of that. And really, we talk about 4 kingdoms a lot, but really there's kind of a 5th kingdom there. And what's that 5th kingdom in Daniel chapter 2? Yeah, it's that stone that's not cut by human hands. And it does what? Yeah, destroys all others, but then as it does so, it starts growing into a mountain that takes over the whole world, right? That's the picture there. That's the kingdom. So with that in mind, here's what's neat about chapter 7. Not only is it rounding off this mirrored image structure in Aramaic, it's our last chapter in Aramaic before we move into Hebrew, but it's also the first of several visions. And so if you've been tracking in that material there, I do have all this laid out there on the first opening page, table of contents, if you're trying to see okay, where are we going now with Daniel chapter 7 through 12? We're going to get into more of the visions, which is oh great, the fun stuff, it's hard to understand. And I will say this can be more difficult, but I think you're pretty well prepared because you just read the first half, and it's not going to be all that much different in the second half. In fact, it's the same message because the overall theme still stands. Who's in control? God's in control, right? And so just if this helps to know where we're going, chapter 7 is, again, that in-between buffer chapter. It'll still be in Aramaic there, but we're going to go from the 4 kingdoms. We'll have another vision in chapter 8 about a ram and a goat. Again, we'll talk more about that as we get there. Another vision, I'm just calling the vision of 70 weeks. That's still not very descriptive. And then chapters 10 through 12, it's more than a vision of a heavenly messenger, because you'll actually see that all of these visions involve heavenly messengers, but that might just be the best way to describe it until we get to that point. Another thing I want to take note of, too, for you here is we're going to go back in time. We're not continuing from the reign of Darius there under the Medo-Persian Empire. We're actually going to go back to Belshazzar And Belshazzar was the last, at least co-regent or king of what nation? Babylon, right? So we're going back to Babylon, but then we're going to soon quickly go after the first year of Belshazzar, then third year of Belshazzar, and then move into Darius again, and lastly we'll have a mention of Cyrus there in our final chapter. So we are still going chronologically, but we got to go back in time a little bit. And so my big question is, why would we switch back to Hebrew? Why would these visions take place that way? Okay, so language is how we communicate. So you would assume that how we communicate with people. Now again, probably Daniel and others are going to be somewhat bilingual there, although we do see that there is a loss of Hebrew eventually later on when they get back to rebuild the temple. But it's to communicate to the audience. And who's the intended audience here? Well, Aramaic is going to appeal to a broader audience, whereas Hebrew might be more narrow. Who is chapters 8, 9, and 10 through 12 for? Probably more like the Hebrews, right? It's the people who speak the language. So that's helpful to note. That doesn't mean that there aren't still messages here in chapter 7 that are very crucially important to God's people who are speaking Hebrew, but it's also a really important message to those kingdoms of the world, right? So we don't want to miss that piece there. So that's fun with structure. But not only that, we're going to change genres completely. And so I don't know, because since we've been here, I don't know that we've talked about this, but I was talking to Byron. I know you all, at least sometime in the past, have discussed this somewhat. But here's a fun phrase that we need to talk about really quickly. Apocalyptic literature. We're going to keep things really simple. Because what does the word apocalypse mean? Revelation. I probably should have started by asking, what does apocalypse not mean? Because in our modern culture, we think, what? Like, collapse. End of the world, collapse, destruction, which, yeah, revealing what's going to happen can involve that, and oftentimes, a lot of times does involve that. But really, we're just talking about revealing. Revealing what? So, you said the truth? The future, okay. It can certainly be revealing the future. It could even be revealing the present in some ways. Say it again.
It is a story. It's just revealed visions, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like watching a movie.
Yeah, there are going to be some very cinematic scenes we'll see here, although some that we're like, I don't want to see that in a movie because it sounds terrifying. But yeah, no, it's a revealing. And if we think about it this way, the word apocalypse is used all throughout even the New Testament. Because guess what? Is the gospel of apocalypse? Is it a revealing? Yeah. In fact, that's exactly how we see it used in places like Luke chapter 2 and verse 32. And you have this prophecy there by Simeon to Mary and Jesus. And he's saying he's going to be a revealing of what God is all about and what his purpose is. Same thing over in Ephesians. Paul uses the word apocalypse to talk about that we might have a spirit of apocalypse. So I don't want us to get too wrapped up in like our thought of what this is. But if it means revelation, then in this context, what has been the theme throughout Daniel? I just said it earlier. God is in control. And so guess what this revealing literature is going to show and reveal? God is in control. Okay, so if we got that part, I don't want us to be too confused and worried about it. But some quick features, and I'm going to run through these real quick. So I know some of you are great about like, I want to take a picture of that or whatever. I'll make sure we share this out. I'll maybe send it out through email in case you can just absorb it right now. But we're going to see a lot of nature, physical things that God created. Animals, rivers, mountains, stars, all of this fun stuff. So that might be symbolic. Sometimes it's just part of the language. And so we won't need to worry about too much about figuring out like the one-to-one parallels with all these things. We're going to get a lot of natural catastrophes, which would make sense because who created all things? God did. And so do you think he would be in control of things like what we read over in Ezekiel, like earthquakes, Read over there in Isaiah about cliffs falling and just a magnitude of things happening there. In Revelation, this idea of the moon turning to blood and the stars falling and strong winds. So yeah, that's characteristic of what God has control over. So revealing God is in control. Usually written at a time of crisis. We're going to see that in the very beginning here of Daniel chapter 12 as we get to that chapter. But also we see the same thing being talked about in Matthew 24. So I'm bringing up some of these different Bible scriptures, not to read them all, but hey, they all have features of revealing how God is going to act. Here's another neat one really quick. They use some of the same phrases more than once. So in Joel 2, it's kind of interesting that God reveals and says, this thing has never happened from the beginning. Something as bad as this or something just like this. And then we go over to Jeremiah 30 and you see, nothing's ever happened like this you've ever seen before. And then we get to Ezekiel and he says, nothing's ever happened like this before. It's like that. And then Daniel says the same thing. And then even Jesus in Matthew 24, you've never seen anything like this before. So there's going to be a pattern, but it's going to also use a little bit of hyperbole language there. We get a conflict between good and evil, which is probably to be expected. Evil is going to seem to be unstoppable, but then also here comes God to intervene and act and defeat evil. I don't think any of that's a surprise to us, but these are all these features of how is God acting, how is God working and showing that he's in control. Remember back in our study of Zechariah, we did talk about a little bit of that too, although that was almost a year ago now, I think. And we're going to see a lot of visions of angels and God's throne and things like that. Last quick ones, and then if you had any questions on that, please ask. But we're going to see heavenly interpreters. So Daniel sees something, and he's like, I saw it. I don't know what that means. And so he's going to ask a lot of questions, and he gets an interpretation, which is helpful for us too, because that means that we are getting an interpretation as well, not some mystery that we can't really solve. I don't think that's part of the purpose of this language and literature. But most importantly, and here's where we come in and where we can learn, is there is an encouragement for the faithful to remain true and loyal to God, as well as the fact that this is showing God's not just great vast destruction, but actually it's showing how he's going to make all things right and restore things and establishes his order. He recreates things. And we're going to see that time and time again. So if things get scary here, that's part of the purpose, to build the drama, but then we know what the answer is and how God's going to restore and act and do all those things. So good. We all mastered apocalyptic literature. Good to go. Any questions on that or comments? Okay. That's really going to take us through the end of Daniel. So we're going to look for a lot of these similar patterns there. So I guess the last thing I'll say here is the best thing to do when we read this is remember, pattern is more important than precision, or principle is more important than precision. Message is more important than precision. That is not to say that we cannot be fairly precise in what we know this means, and also we can be pretty precise of what it's not talking about, so don't get me wrong there. But if we're walking away from this just wondering, well, I really wanted to know what that one symbol meant, and it's really going to bother me if it doesn't, I'm glad I want to study God's word to figure that out, but really, if we're not walking away with the message, we're missing something there. And the pattern that we're going to see actually used again and again and again throughout the Bible, even going into the New Testament. So let's start reading. Let's do that. Daniel chapter 7, and we'll break this up into 3 chunks. So I'm going to need at least 3 readers. So I'm just giving you a preparing time here. I'd like someone, if we can, read us Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 all the way through verse 8.
Wrote down the dream, telling the main fact. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and the 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there on this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words.
All right, thank you. It's pretty wild images here. And that's like the first half of the vision. In fact, that would leave us in a moment of despair if we stopped there. But there's enough to contemplate here and work through. So let's talk about the timing piece, because that might not seem to be all that important, but I do think it does help us prepare ourselves for the images that Daniel sees here. What time does Daniel see this vision? So, bedtime. It says a dream and a vision. So again, this is probably not what you want to be like dreaming about. So that's that piece there. That's pretty common. We saw the same thing back in Zechariah, right? He had those dream visions as well. I guess you could take this question multiple ways. What other time is this taking place in? Belshazzar's reign or rule, right? And so that is helpful to take note of, because it's the first year of King Belshazzar. If you just want to try to put things into place there, we understand Nabonidus was probably the main king, but he took Belshazzar, his son, and made him co-regent during probably his 3rd year of his reign, from what we know from history. So we're looking at 550. That doesn't really give us a whole lot of context, except if this is going on during Babylonian captivity time still, Babylonian Empire, probably would expect to see some Babylonian imagery in these visions, right? That would seem to make sense, right? And if this is helpful, this is over 50 years since Daniel's deportation to Babylon. He's not new at this. He was back interpreting Daniel chapter 2, which he saw a very similar vision much earlier than this. So this is not a new picture for Daniel, but at the same time, it's also very terrifying. He knows the answer in some ways, but also needs that reinforcing, we'll see later on. And back in chapter 2, whose vision was it? Nebuchadnezzar's dream that he had. And Daniel is able to interpret it. Here, it's Daniel's vision, and we're going to find out later on, he can't interpret it unless he asks for some help from the heavenly host there that's enlisted there in the latter part of the chapter. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Let's talk about this first image there too. So we got some beasts. We have 4 of them, not parts of a statue. They're much more alive, much more terrifying. But where did they come from in the vision? Out of the sea. Okay. Now, if you look at that, you're thinking, wait a second. What kind of animals are these, at least in terms of what they look like? Not things that come from the sea. So that's not right. Something's off here. Okay, and then we also see that the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up this great sea. So what's that about? How do we make use of these images here without worrying too much about what they have to represent one-to-one, But can we use the Bible to also interpret this for us? Because we know these words are used elsewhere in Scripture. What are we talking about here? What's this image? What other images come to mind?
God is in control of the wind, so he's
Okay.
causing this to take place.
So that's interesting, right? That usually we think of, God in control of the winds. And it does say 4 winds of heaven. We're probably talking about the skies more than anything. So we're going to see, is it God allowing them to come up out of it? At the very least, we know God has control over both the winds and the sea. So this probably shouldn't be as threatening as maybe initially we would think. So that's interesting. Other biblical images that come to mind here. Okay, because we get some beasts.
Comes up out.
See, and we get some land beasts too.
And one of the beasts has all the features
Mm-hmm.
that are mentioned of the beasts that are listed here.
Yes. Yeah, you thought these were bad. Now we're going to come smush them all together there in Revelation later on, right? Which is really helpful for us to note too, that if you want to read and understand what Revelation is saying, you need to know what's happening in Daniel, right? So we can't skip out on that, right? Okay.
Kind of on the same thing, like you get to the end of Revelation, and the sea is something that's done away with. We have
Yes.
these bad things coming out of the sea.
Mm.
Our sin passes the sea.
Yes.
Kind of a negative place where bad things come from.
Yes. And it's really helpful for us to acknowledge this because, we were just talking about this in our Matthew class over in the young adults class. Jesus has power over calming the seas, and the demons he casts in the swine, where do they go? They go right back into the sea. They go into the chaos waters. That's what we're talking about here from the very beginning. If you go to Genesis chapter 1, you see the picture of God creating things, and his spirit is hovering over the face of the waters, which you're like, well, has he created those yet? It's kind of weird. Probably more of a picture than anything else there is that's the place where it's powerful, and you have Israelites who are not seafaring people, and there's something going on here. But also what's interesting too is we have a wind going on here, which is really the same kind of word as God's Spirit. Is it God's Spirit doing this though? If anything, this should remind us of Genesis 1, but this is the opposite. This isn't creation, this is decreation. Things are coming out of the place that they should have stayed in. Or did God create beings that have these mix match like qualities here? No, he put everything in order the right way. He had those that flew in the air, he had the things of the sea, he had those on the land. Something's up here, and it might seem like everything's falling apart. And I think that image should be in our minds as we read through these. So God's going to actually recreate or restore in the end. So we got 4 winds everywhere, all directions of the globe. I think we talked about this back in Zechariah, our study there. But really, all of the earth is covered, right? You got the four directions. Okay, so everything's there. This would impact the whole world as we know it too, if that helps with the Aramaic language plus the 4 winds together. But again, the sea is terrifying. It represents chaos, a limitless ocean. But an important thing is we already know this. We can go to the Psalms. And who has power over the sea? Who used the chaos waters to defeat the great enemy of Israel, the Egyptians? God used it for that purpose, right? And in fact, we go over to places like Isaiah 17, and we get this picture of the nations coming kind of up out of the water. So that's what we're looking at here, right? Okay. We already mentioned that picture there of in Revelation 13, you get some beasts from the earth. But also in this chapter, we're going to have that mentioned too. So don't forget where they came from, does matter. Let's go one by one as much as we can. I don't want to take too much time with this. And again, we already have this interpreted for us from chapter 2 in a lot of ways. What do we see about the first beast here? Does it remind you of anything? Qualities? What does it look like?
Lion of Judah.
Okay.
David is supposed to be the lion.
Okay. So yeah, lion's a powerful animal, right?
And they are lions in their midst, were in Egypt, in Canaan.
Yes.
Lion and there, Daniel was in the lion.
I was going to say, not just there, but also, what did we just read back in the last chapter? Daniel chapter 6. Oh, does God have power over lions? We just saw that. So that should probably be on our minds. Okay. What other quality do they have, though? They're not just lions, which are scary enough. They got eagle's wings. Why eagle's wings in particular?
Powerful, large,
Okay.
able to rise above.
It's not pigeon wings. It's eagle's wings. They're birds of prey, which are also in the law considered to be clean or unclean. Unclean animals, right? Because they eat other animals there. Yep, yep. So it's meant to inspire fear or terror, all that there.
No one would miss this, because
No.
when you walk into the Ishtar Gate, there are striding lions leading or on both sides of the wall, and they have wings. So
And where's the Ishtar Gate, Byron? Yeah, Babylon, right? Which you see on my next slide, we'll look at, and if you want to have that vision, that image. But no, that's exactly right, though, right? It's for us, we're like, oh, that's kind of weird. But no, this is an image of what's going on at the time, right? You have majesty and power all used in one. Although in Jeremiah 49, God's described as one kind of being like a lion to a shepherd and sheep who are going to be devoured, and also having wings like eagles. So that's kind of interesting. But notice this last piece here. It's not just what it was, what happened to it? Its wings were plucked. And what happened there? It was standing up like, now does that remind you of anything? Especially when we're talking about Babylon. I already gave you the answer up on the slide, so you kind of know. Back in chapter 4, do you remember what happened as Nebuchadnezzar was brought low? He was turned into an animal. In fact, we kind of have this picture that he almost kind of had like wings of some sort. His hair had grown like eagle's feathers. Oh, okay. So it does sound familiar there, doesn't it? Okay, so we get this picture there. God is already acting in this way. This is after that time of Nebuchadnezzar, so Daniel hopefully should be picking up on some of these pieces there. We should, too. Beast turned into human, although these other ones are not going to look so much like that. Now, I got some images there. I didn't have the Ishtar Gate, although you can see if you look really closely in the background, it is patterned after that. You can find all sorts of fun images trying to depict these things online. This was the most tame and kind of nice one I could find. But yeah, as we talk about this, very clearly it's paralleling with that gold head and statue of Babylon in Daniel 2. Again, these winged lions are found on the Ishtar Gate, as Byron already mentioned, in Babylonian ruins. It's a very clear image there. There's no surprises. Okay, next one, number 2. Real quick, what do we got here, and what stands out to you? Anything interesting about this second beast? Verse 5 there.
Doing what we think it ought to do, and that is eat something.
Yeah, no surprises, right? It's a bear. It's got ribs in its mouth. I mean, that's what they do. They devour, they eat. In fact, it said to arise and devour much meat. So it's kind of given the command to go and do those things. Okay, if the last kingdom we just talked about here was Babylon, and we're seeing this during the time of Belshazzar, which is Babylon, and then a command is given to a next beast to arise and devour, what picture are we getting here? Yeah, the Medes and Persians, but also kind of this fact of like, hey, they're coming in. Like this is in the process there. Remember when Nabonidus puts Belshazzar as a co-regent, he's off doing whatever, and that starts letting the Medes and Persians come in. So this is kind of like in action here. Remember, apocalyptic literature can also not just be future, it's also kind of describing what's kind of happening now. Don't want us to forget that piece. But we get a bear. It's just as scary, just as powerful. It's raised on one side, right? And so you have a lot of people who interpret that saying, oh, well, one side is more powerful than the other. You have the Medo-Persian Empire, then that kind of makes sense. I would argue that seems to make sense because we see the same thing in chapter 8, which I don't want to get into too much, but there's 2 horns and one taller than the other and all that fun stuff. But there's 2 arms in the Daniel 2 picture, so this kind of seems to fit all together. What about the 3 ribs in its mouth? I mean, It means it's going to grow, right? It's eaten. Get some nutrition from those ribs. I don't know. It's going to get bigger. We see the same thing, of course, in history. And I think we already talked about this, but does seem to look at the Medo-Persian Empire. That seems to be pretty clear cut there. And again, we see that there are kind of three main kingdoms it does devour. One being Babylon. It also takes over that Egypt territory, as well as Lydia, the kingdom of Lydia, which is over there more like Asia Minor. So it expands. It gets bigger. Yeah, Turkey. Okay.
Just one thought.
Yeah.
So it's interesting in that this is occurring during the reign of Belshazzar. The Babylonian symbol is stripped of its wings, stands on 2 feet, and has the mind of the human mind, which kind of shows that it grew because God's wisdom made it grow, but when God was done with it, he just put him back to regular thinking, and Belshazzar, they kind of represents that.
Yeah,
right?
certainly.
No wisdom, and they lose it to the Medo-Persian.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the Medo-Persian is in fact, I think the bear is scarier.
Yeah, maybe.
And it became the largest empire
Yes.
before the Romans.
Yeah, that's very true, right? And we will kind of talk about that size picture, because what's the next one? What's the third described as? Bear's pretty big. This one should be kind of scary, but for another reason, not because of its intimidating size, but because of its speed, right? We got a leopard. So leopards are, I mean, it's not a cheetah, I guess, but leopards are still fast. But unexpected. But it's got wings too. It's going to even go faster here. Not only that, but it also has what distinguishing features that most leopards don't have. Wings and foreheads together there, right? So that makes it very different in nature. Maybe like the winds, like looking in all 4 directions or something like that. It does go all over the world. We'll see this in a second. Notice the language, though, I think is interesting. And dominion was given to it. Now that's kind of interesting because the other 2 weren't given dominion, or at least wasn't stated that case. Any ideas on that? Do the others not have dominion? Maybe it was not even in relative comparison in terms of their dominion, although that's kind of to be debatable. Are we talking about land amassing, power?
Land and power both were amassed.
Okay, and might even make the argument too that just like we're talking about time, the other 2 already were kind of in power to an extent. This one's kind of up and coming, right? And we're going to see this kingdom that probably represents what empire? The Greeks, right? Yeah, yes, especially under the leadership of Alexander. So we're going to get more and more images stacked on top of this as we get into chapter 8. But certainly this 4 heads kind of piece there, we see you have one main leader, but then really it divides into 4. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. That seems to make the most sense right now. Yes?
I think 4 is coming from all directions.
Yeah.
Because he came from
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he conquered, and conquered quickly, and conquered just about everywhere. Yeah. So, okay. Here's the last one, because really I want to get into the next section. It was the most important part that we'll look at this evening. So, 4th beast. What kind of animal? I don't know, it's nothing like I've ever seen before. This thing is like the one that only nightmares can devise and create, right? No comparison. So that should tell us something. It's got some iron teeth. Wait a second. I don't feel like animals usually have iron teeth. In fact, humans don't either, but humans use iron, right? So that's not something seen in nature. We did see iron back in chapter 2. Right, as we have the different metals there. So now we're drawing some even further tighter connections between these 2 visions. And then if that wasn't enough, notice what it says. It both crushed and trampled, which we saw the same kind of thing in chapter 2. Okay, and so this is the fun question. How many horns does it have? Because that's one thing we didn't really specify. Yeah, so you got 10, but then plus 1, right? And so I'm speeding through this, so if you have any comments on it, feel free to jump in. But horns represent power. Usually we saw that back in Zechariah chapter 1, and then one of those night visions there too. You had those 4 horns, the different powers that are oppressing Israel and putting them in captivity. But this is 5 times that normal number of horns, right? If you think about it. Maybe animals have 2. Don't really know of too many that have more than that. But you multiply that out, that's a lot, right? We got 10 toes of a statue for trying to make that parallel, so that's kind of interesting. But we didn't have anything about this little horn or another toe coming up for the statue. So that's something kind of new. And the uprooting of 3 others. Again, we'll kind of leave some of this simmering for a bit, but I know our minds are going to Rome, which I think is fair. Like, if this is Rome, we have to ask the question, why the 10 horns? We're going to talk later about horns really equal like kings or kingdoms, like all these beasts do. And so should we count them literally? There's a lot of different questions that emerge here. And I'll let that kind of simmer for a bit because is this Rome? Yes. But as we have the picture here of what the Israelites would be dealing with out of captivity, could they also apply this pattern to other things they see? Mention that because next chapter we're going to talk about another little horn that emerges that doesn't seem to be Rome, but does paint a picture of someone who has these qualities. Let's look at those qualities really quick. How is it described there at the end in verses 8? What's up with this new horn? It's what? It's a big talker, boastful, right? Arrogant. It's little though. That's interesting. It's not a bigger horn than the other ones. It is little. That's something to be said. Because it has eyes, like a human. So that's interesting. We're getting this human imagery again. Again, little could be less power, or it could just be a shorter reign. Time is going to be a big factor here. We'll see in a little bit. Eyes like a human. It's clearly a human ruler, if we weren't confused by that already. But yeah, there's a lot of great boasts, which when you're a king and you have power, what's to be expected? Did Nebuchadnezzar not do the same thing? Is that the reason why he was turned into an animal, right? Turned into a beast. So with all that in mind, any thoughts or questions on it? We haven't gotten to the interpretation yet, so it's like we're kind of in the middle ground here, and we need to get to this next piece because I think it'll do some of the interpreting for us. But things you were confused by, things you noticed. Okay. I want us to feel comfortable asking questions because this is brand new. This is fun new stuff with the visions compared to the narrative stories we saw before. Okay, well, if that's the case, then let's go ahead and read what I would argue is the most important part of our study this evening, and that is verses 9 through 14. Would someone like to read that for me?
I watched till thrones were put into place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. I watched them because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and the kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed.
Okay, thank you. I hope alarm bells were going off in your head because we're seeing a lot of similar language that we've seen like everywhere in Daniel. What would some of those words or phrases be? So we can start making some connections here. So Ancient of Days is interesting. We actually really haven't seen that yet, although that's going to be of really big importance, right? Okay.
14, dominion, glory, kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and men of every language. So, those are all words that have been used before.
Yeah. Like, who really like to talk about all the kingdoms and the peoples and the nations and the men of every language? Who was all called to gather together for chapter 3, the big, monument that Nebuchadnezzar erects? Or when he actually makes a decree admitting that God is the one with all dominion and the true kingdom and things like that, he issues that decree to all peoples and nations. We're talking about a big, global scale here of who is in control. So that's important. Okay.
Kingdom that will not be destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one that, will not pass away, will not be. We saw that back in chapter 2 too, right? In terms of the kingdom that grows as this mountain over the whole earth. So as we see this here, we got to identify a couple different images. So he keeps looking, because it's not the end. That's the whole big picture here, is that's not the end with the beast. You might feel like it's the end, that's the end of your dream, but no, there's this whole other side of things that are happening. What's up with the appearance of the next one who comes onto the scene here? Well, Norma already talked about it, the Ancient of Days.
White hair,
Okay. What does that seem to symbolize?
indicating age,
Indicating age, okay. So,
been there a long time.
yes, and that makes sense because of the title, Ancient of Days. Now, we haven't seen this phrase used in Scripture before. That's kind of interesting. Although, of course, we know God is eternal, so this is probably to be expected there, right? The one older than any of the other kings by far, because there's not really an age you can ascribe to that one who is doing what? What is he doing? What does he do? In verse 9. Takes his seat, right? So there's plural thrones set up, which is interesting, but he's the only one who takes his seat, right? That's all that's described there. He has hair like white snow, and that's age, but also purity. We see that in Isaiah, right? Chapter 1, talking about being like washed and cleansed. Same thing in Psalm 51, as David prays to be cleansed that way too. What's going on here with the throne, though? It's not just like, oh, it's nice and gold or something. It's on fire. So, and not only that, but it has wheels. Hey, it has wheels. Have we seen that anywhere else? If you go back to Ezekiel chapter 1, you have this throne chariot scene. It's on fire, right? So what's up with the fire then? What do we take from that? And there's not only that, there's a river of fire flowing coming out before him. Would probably be the first place our mind goes, and I think that's where it should go. Now, again, when we think of judgment, we usually think bad, but is judgment bad? It's being used to purge the evil, right? Other places we see, okay, we want to be judged because it purifies, right? That's the whole purpose of even the captivity that Daniel's in the first place, is not to destroy them, annihilate them, but to purify them, like you would metals and stuff. So good and bad, it depends on which side you're on, I guess. And so, yeah, we have that there, right? I don't even think it's just to point out that he's going to judge, but it is kind of an opposite picture what we see of like a river of water flowing out from his throne that we see in Ezekiel as well. So you won't take time to read through all of those, but again, pretty common image there. Malachi 4 does the same thing too. Okay, what does this one do once all those around him are seated? Opens the books. What word is used to talk about that? The court sat. So what kind of scene is this? A judgment scene. Okay, fire, court sitting. They open the books. I mean, all of this is playing into a piece here. We have thousands upon thousands, by the way, myriads, probably not literal numbers here, but innumerable servants in the court of the true judge, right? Books are opened. We see that phrase used even all the way back to, Exodus chapter 32, when Moses is saying, like, no, don't blot my name out of the book or the name of the people out of the book. Of course, we see that elsewhere, like in Malachi and Revelation. So there's judgment on the kingdoms of men happening here. But that's been occurring all along, right? It's not like this is the first time this is happening. Should we take this as being like a time reference? I guess is the question. This is like one judgment day, I guess is what I'm what I'm asking. Sure.
I think a picture that we kind of see God alone here, but we get these snippets all through the Bible of all of these people who are supposed to be beings that are enacting God's will and not doing it right,
Sure.
Which I think may kind of lead to other people ruling with him later instead of those. But
Yes. And we see some pictures of that even too later on in Daniel. So I don't want to spoil too many things, but I think you're exactly right. Like, we need to get familiar with this image because this is all throughout the Bible. It shouldn't be a surprise. Daniel would interpret it this way, saying, okay, yeah, this is how God rules. It's him ruling alone, but he has a court of people there. Well, not people, but heavenly beings. Okay, so you think that'd be it, right? He judges, he rules, but what? Mm-hmm. Yes.
The terrifying beast is destroyed.
Yep.
The others are allowed to exist.
Yeah. And if you think of why that's so important for the audience of Daniel, and for us too, as we think, is God currently judging? Is he only going to ever judge at the end? Well, no, that's both. And God is in control. And so it's not like he's waiting till the end to be in control. And I think we do, again, have some time references there that picture that. And so that ends up being a hopeful image, right? That's what we're seeing here all together. The new horn keeps on boasting, right? You'd think it'd be the end, like, oh, you see a river of fire coming at you. You don't keep on with the arrogant, boastful words. But that happens anyway. And of course, the horn is but a human. And here's the thing. As you get to verse 11, what would you think would we have a picture of when here you have a boastful human kingdom and God himself judging on his throne? Big blowout explosion with armies fighting against each other. No. What happens? Nope, he's gone. Yep, taken care of, right? His body was destroyed, given over to the burning fire, which that's kind of interesting because we've also seen others being given over to the burning fire, but persisting. If you think back in chapter 3, where some of Daniel's friends were thrown in there, but no, he's slain and consumed by the fire. It's almost anticlimactic in some senses because God was always in control. It's not as if it was, I'm not quite sure, it's a nail biter here. That was to be the case. And so these other beasts do have dominion for an appointed period of time, but notice what that appointed period of time isn't. It's not eternity, right? Only the Ancient of Days has that on his side. And that's how we're going to see time talked about through the rest of Daniel is it's time cut short. It's only part of the time. Persevere because it's only going to be a little bit longer. If we remember that, that should help us through all of this. But here's the important piece. Well, I guess we should say who determines how long is something going before something gets destroyed. That's God's doing, first of all. That's a message that we get here, right? We might not see that happening, visible to the human eye, but that's the one who sets how things are going to go. Yeah.
Another interesting message here is that the way the beast is described, it sounds like it would be a very difficult beast to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
The beast is overcome in an
Yes.
The destruction is really not even
Yeah.
hardly described, it was so quick.
No. Yeah, in some ways you're like, oh, did I miss something? Where is that whole long chapter we need to describe it? No, it doesn't need it, right? Which does show the immediacy of how God deals with it. And, okay, we get to, I'll skip over. Oh yeah, season and time, we talked about that vague idea. Okay, so who comes to the Ancient of Days and what is given to him? Using the language of the text. I'll start there. One like a son of man, which is interesting because we already saw the first was like a lion, and these beasts were like these things, like maybe not like actually literally, although what does son of man imply? Human, right? You know how many times the phrase son of man is used in the book of Ezekiel? God saying, listen, human, son of man, go and do this thing. So we know that is appealing to the humanity. But what's going on here with this son of man? Okay, so he's like a son of man. So that is interesting. Yeah, keep that in mind.
The Jews understood him because they got really mad at him.
Yes. So as we look at the gospel accounts, we can understand what they understood this to mean. Just like beasts coming out of the sea that shouldn't belong in the sea and coming out. That wasn't right. That was decreation. That was opposite of what God intended. Here's what's interesting. How is that counteracted? Is a man supposed to be in the heavenly court scene? I mean, like, not really, from what we know. Humans live on earth, and yeah, you got... Okay, so that's how things are dealt with? We take one like a son of man and do what? What happens to this one like a son of man? Given dominion and the throne and all that stuff there, right? So one, we get clouds of heaven. That's an important phrase to note because every time we have this passage in Daniel 7 quoted, the clouds of heaven is joined along with it in our gospel account. So what's in the cloud? God's presence, associated with judgment in some ways too. We see how God is in control of the clouds. In fact, actually go over to Isaiah chapter 19. This is the one other passage we'll look at before we go back to Daniel, because I just need us to know this, is God is described as the great cloud rider, the one who comes in power. Isaiah chapter 19, verse 1, oracle concerning Egypt. This is God. Destruction against Egypt. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. And what are they going to do? They're all going to be judged, right? That's the picture there. It's really important imagery because pretty much in all other Mesopotamian, even Canaanite religions, they had a big cloud rider that they were all worshiping. What is this saying? Who's the true one? It's one like a son of man who does not fit their picture. In fact, fits a picture of one we know fairly well. And so, yeah, he's able to approach the Ancient Days and not be destroyed. That's pretty interesting. So other throne room scenes, things have to happen. Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah approaches the throne and he hears, holy, 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 from the seraphim. And what has to happen? That coal from the altar, purifying him. We don't see that happening here. That's kind of interesting. And we already talked about the one like picture. Here's what I will say, and this will impact what we read in the next minute as we finish off this chapter and be done, is like a son of man seems to be like a representation. And be careful how you interpret when I say representation. Not like, we're representing all people everywhere. Although, kind of. Because we have a representative of what every human should be who's made in the image of God, returning back to him. I bring that up because what we're going to see in verses 15 and onward. So hold on to that image. Can I get one final reader to finish off the chapter for us? A lot of it's just going to be repeated, so we'll speed through it real quick. Verse 15 through 28, if you have a voice for it.
As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely, that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Thus he said, the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High, and wear down the saints of the highest one, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation is, as for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, but I kept the matter to myself.
Okay, so anything in there that stood out to you of like, oh, I didn't understand that, so I'm glad I had that? I mean, this should sound pretty familiar. We saw a lot of things there. I'm skipping over a whole lot, but I'm just going to catch us up to speed real quick. So Daniel's pretty anxious and distressed from what he sees, and he's really focused on that fourth beast. But we've already kind of had a picture there. We've seen over and over again. One, we're told that if we didn't know already, these beasts were kings or kingdoms, so that makes sense. I think we were already there. But what's the difference, I guess I should say, between what we saw in the vision and then in the interpretation by, again, one of these who happened to be in this courtroom scene, explain this to Daniel. What's the biggest difference you noticed there in the interpretation compared to the vision?
Like there was some detail on what was going to happen around the time when this beast goes away. It's waging war with the saints, and judgment
Yes.
given on favor of them.
Yes. It brings in God's people, right? The saints, the holy ones, quite literally is what we have here, repeated over and over again. Do you notice how one like of Son of Man isn't described at all here? Is that kind of interesting? Instead, who's kind of, I want to be careful how I say this, who's kind of swapped out with him in terms of the interpretation of the vision? It's the saints of the Most High, right? It's the people, it's God's people. So who is given the kingdom? It's those who persevere and understand that, hey, this is going to be a fourth kingdom like none other. It's going to devour and crush them. It's going to come up against the people. But then, one more time, in verse 26, the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion of this fourth beast will be taken, specifically that little horn, will be taken away and annihilated, destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the one like the Son of Man? Well, yes, but also because it ends up being, just like we would say, we are made one in Christ. Go Galatians chapter 3. It's those who are the people of the holy ones of the highest one, right? And an interesting picture there.
Would Jesus possibly be who's being?
Oh, maybe.
About in the I mean, the Most High
Sure.
The Ancient of Days passes judgment on behalf of the saints of the Most High, almost like that. I've always thought of the Most High, the Ancient of Days here, but it sounds like maybe that's.
I think those lines kind of blur a little bit, don't they? Which they always kind of blur a little bit. And just to be fair too, most Jews, at least from the Second Temple period, would have viewed this as like, the two powers in heaven that are God, but they understood that it was more than just God the Father. We have a picture of one like a Son of Man. And that's why when we get to the gospel accounts, for instance, and we see this picture here, let's look at this as one of our last scriptures. We'll maybe make some kind of comments on this because this last point was really the most important one. Let's go to Matthew. You can probably go to pretty much any of the gospel accounts and you'll see this image here. But Matthew chapter 26, and read here. Byron mentioned this earlier, which again, I think this points to kind of the picture that you were even alluding to there, Austin, as well, because why would you get so upset by this? Matthew chapter 26. And here's where we have a king who was about to be enthroned, as he will say. Starting toward the end of this chapter, verse 62. We have the high priest, which we know to be Caiaphas there among the council. He stands up and says to him, being Jesus, "Do you not answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus says, "Yes, I'm the Christ, the Son of God." No, doesn't say that. He means that. But he doesn't say that because what does he say next? Jesus said to them, "You've said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And to be fair, that's Daniel 7 plus Psalm 110 put together there. Psalm 110 being the psalm of a kind of Davidic kingly figure being enthroned, and priest, by the order of Melchizedek, and like a whole lot of other things there too. Jesus saying, yeah, that's who I am, and that's who Daniel was referring to all along. But what does this also mean for Caiaphas and these other rulers? Well, they go, well, I guess we should probably read the next verse too, right? What do they say? The high priest tears his robes and says, "He's blasphemed. What further need do we have of witness? Behold, we have now heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" And they say, "He deserves death." Him quoting Daniel 7, probably, if it wasn't really that big of a deal, it's only talking about a human or all of Israel or whatever else, any other interpretation, they probably wouldn't have reacted that way. And of course, we see ultimately they do crucify him. And then he's raised. And then he speaks to his disciples for 40 days after that. And then we get to Acts chapter 1 and verse 9. And what happens? Let's read it really quickly just so you know that it's there. Acts chapter 1 and verse 9. After speaking to his disciples, after saying these things, he was lifted up while they were looking on, and a cloud received him out of their sight. Revelation chapter 1, verse 7, which is the same thing. John quotes from Daniel. Revelation 1, verse 13, shows the same thing. Jesus. Stephen, when he's stoned, what does he see? He says, "I see one like a son of man seated on high on the right hand of the God." So with all that, then I think we kind of know what Daniel 7 is talking about. But the greatest piece of all this is, how does this vision end? Something that he will build on in later visions, but one we need to be reminded of. Do you see one like a son of man seated on throne, enthroned on high? With your eyes. I don't. In fact, I look at the world around me and I see a whole lot of other people who are putting themselves up on thrones and boasting and whatever else, speaking against God's people, calling themselves to be God. In fact, that's going to be a pattern. You see that over and over again. Revelation's going to pick up on that. You can even look to what Paul writes over into the Thessalonians too. He uses that same kind of language. But what do we know as a reality? It doesn't have to be physical reality. We understand a spiritual reality. And that was a scene painted for us there in Daniel chapter 7. Where's Jesus? He is at the right hand of God, enthroned on high. He is the king. And then what do we have hopes for? And we didn't read Romans chapter 8, but I think that's a pretty clear picture of what we are called to be too. Through him, we have that hope of being glorified as he was. Through his sufferings. Not through a bunch of great things and being crowned and given riches, but through sufferings, that we might be fellow heirs with him too, and be like those saints who will persevere and be given the kingdom. I think that's a great hope, and I hope you find consolation in that too, especially dealing with their own kingdoms of men we see around us. Good reminders all around. But we're not done because there's still more chapters of Daniel, and you'll really wrap all that up in chapter 12. But thank you for your patience. It's been a little bit over and helping me get through that. If you do want any of the slides or stuff like that, I skipped over a whole lot more. I'm happy to send those out through email too.